This podcast is created for farmers and powered by Pioneer Agronomy to bring you agronomic insights and proven solutions to fuel forward-thinking farming.
Hello and welcome to the Indiana Pioneer Agronomy podcast. I'm Brian Shrader, agronomist on the east side of Indiana, joined as always by my co-host Ben Jacob from southern Indiana and Carl Joern from western Indiana. Good morning, guys. How are you this morning?
Morning, Brian. Doing well.
Doing all right, Brian. We're sitting a little wet here with some rain, but otherwise we're doing A-okay.
We are. This would be the May 3rd edition of the Indiana Pioneer Agronomy podcast. And so come off of probably, depending on your location in the state, somewhere around maybe 5 to 10 days of decent weather. And then we've now got rain, certainly setting cold here this morning. I'm right around 40 degrees here in Upland, Indiana. And I had 1 2/10 inches in the storm event, but do know that parts of my territory are up close to 2 inches now. So where are you guys at, I guess, temperature this morning? And do you have any sense of what the rain totals are for you guys in this last storm event?
Yeah, so down south, I'm sitting in Bedford this morning, way to a call, and it is 44 degrees in the truck. And at my house, we were right around the same as you were, Brian. A little bit over 1 inch on Sunday. Of course, that also followed a little shot of rain we got on Friday, so we're pretty close to 2 inches on the weekend there. As far as the temperature of that rain when it came, yesterday's was a little bit cool, but overall, I don't think we have anything to worry about from a temperature standpoint. And soils being saturated, we were relatively dry ahead of that. Really good field conditions in the last week, so I don't think the rain in and of itself is too much to worry about. It would be nice to see some heat coming though.
For sure. Yep. Carl, what about Lafayette? Where are we at with rain totals on the western side of the state?
Yeah, no, we're fortunate relative to you all. We've gotten a few sporadic rains and a couple downpour 30-minute type of systems, but I think the moisture picked up as it tracked east. So for growers in northwest Indiana, I guess we're probably closer to 1/2 inch than we are 2 inches. That varies with where you are in the state, and increased a little bit as you got north of me. So some of my growers might be sitting a little bit wetter than what I am here in Lafayette, but nowhere near we may be an order of magnitude different from what you all are. But rain's still coming here Monday, May the 1st. So more to be told on that story. But we're also sitting 40, 45 degrees in
Sure.
my area. One thing we haven't touched on, though, soil temperatures, they've been holding. Once we got out of middle last week's, last stretch of really cold in the 30s types of mornings, we've been able to kind of hold 45 degrees to start the day off and warm back up by, middle of the afternoon. So I think we're all glad to see that the cold soil temperatures are probably in the rear view.
Yeah. And one of the things that's been a little bit interesting as I've evaluated planting progress on the east side of the state, talked to my fellow agronomists here on this side of the state, Lance Shepard, Brian Early, and Eric Miller. It's been really interesting with progress to note the small geographic locations that you've got a fairly intense amount of planting that has taken place. And then you've got large stretches where we really don't have very much done, at least on the east side of the state. My own particular territory, corn planting for me is probably 5, maybe 7%, but we've probably got a quarter of the soybean crop planted, and that might even be a little bit conservative. But with that said, I've got areas that are probably pushing 50% planted on both crop. So I'd be curious, is that similar to what you all are seeing as well across your geographies, or is that just an eastern Indiana, maybe Brian Shrader type of environment that we're seeing?
Yeah, I think you see there is the difference. There's, you have a little bit more tighter holding clay type soils in northeast Indiana. As you come back west across the state, and we get, some more loamy ground, some more sand content in that soil textural triangle. We've definitely picked up some increased planning progress over what you all have, Brian. For the folks I work with, we're probably 60% or so done on beans, maybe around 30% of the corn crop. But as you expand scope, beyond the folks I serve and get, the northwest quadrant of the state, I guess we're probably somewhere around maybe 45% of the corn crops in. So significantly more progress done as you move a little bit further south. I'm curious though how that tracks with Ben as those areas kind of meet.
Yeah, I'd echo that sentiment. Kind of along my north edge, it's moving a little bit slower, with the exception of the area, north of Terre Haute, kind of up towards Danville, where you get a little bit more sand. Those folks were able to start early, and they pushed pretty hard. Really across the area I cover, I would be pretty similar to you, Carl, somewhere around 60% on beans, and I would be surprised if we have 25% of the corn planted. It's probably a little bit less than that. Not necessarily because field conditions dictated, just folks exercising some patience after last year, and we had a really good late corn crop, and the early corn was okay, but not great. But as Brian mentioned, there are some exceptions to that. If I support a little bit towards Marshall, Illinois, and their April 10th, those guys seem to be going full tilt. So there's been really good planting progress over there. And again, it's in pockets, and it's largely an individual operations, assessment of risk and logistics is really what it comes down to. I mean, we had some really good soil conditions. If the temperature would have cooperated, we'd probably be 80 or 90% on both. But with the cool weather that we've had, and some, still some nights down into the 20s not that long ago, guys have, I think, rightfully shown quite a bit of patience here this spring. As you go down the river, though, south, go down towards Evansville, south of Vincennes, that number is going to jump up pretty sharply.
So Ben, I guess that maybe is a good idea or good thought to transition to. We're sitting here on the first day of May. We've got a forecast, at least for the early part of the week, is cool. We've talked about the rain already. Those folks that are going to start calling, I guess maybe first question, when do you expect to be able to get back into the field based on the forecast and those folks? And then the second question that kind of goes along with that, what's the advice for folks as they start to either finish a crop or get to the field in earnest the first time, knowing that honestly the forecast looks to me like we're probably going to have 10 days or 2 weeks once it does start to warm up of pretty good planting conditions. So what's the advice, or what conversations do you expect to have with folks as we move forward?
Yeah, so I mean, if we start with field conditions, I mean, honestly, with the amount of rain we had, it's really going to be late week. There may be some spots Thursday where guys can get back rolling, but it's probably gonna be closer to the weekend before we can really get going again. Which, if the forecast is true, lines up pretty well for when we expect the heat to come back. It does feel to me that every time I've looked at the forecast throughout this spring so far, that the heat's been 5 days away. So we'll see if that
Yeah.
actually comes
Yeah.
true. But I think that, like I said, we did have a pretty good shot of rain, but we're really nice field conditions. And the good thing is with this patience is looking at early April, when we had a few warm days. We had a lot. The weed growth was just kind of ridiculous around here. So we've had the opportunity to get in and get some of that back under control, get some groundwork, get some burn down sprayed. So, we have to start looking at, okay, when did we spray that initial burn down? What did we have for residual in there? Let's make sure that we're, aside from just planting, which is obviously very important, that we're tracking our other field activities as well, and understand that if you're 3 or 4 weeks out from your burn down, you might need to reconsider your residual options when you get back into the field here this week. But if the forecast is true, I really have no problem just opening up. I mean, if you look at equipment capacity that we have these days, it's a blessing and a curse. if conditions are marginal, you can put yourself in a really bad spot by planting way too much. But when it does break loose, it just does not take us that much time to get a crop in the ground these days. And I think and really hope that this window that we're seeing open up this weekend, and to the point that you can believe a long range forecast seems like it's going to maintain for a bit, is really going to give us the best opportunity, and hopefully it holds true and we can hit it hard. And if it's a 2 week window, I mean, that's quite frankly, that's all we need.
Right. And Carl, I mean, you talked about probably closer to a half an inch of rainfall, and certainly I know you and Nick, and you've got some sands that you guys are working through as well. I guess I'm curious, what are you looking at? Is it Wednesday, Tuesday, maybe even for some areas that you can go? And then what are you having conversations with or expecting to have conversations with growers on as they get ready to go back to the field?
Yeah, great question, Brian. I think it kind of depends on an individual basis. There's growers that if they heeded my advice to go chase the heavy ground last week, if they were fit to be tied and needed to get planting to cover some acres, I said, hey, we have good field conditions now. When the rain does turn on, we won't, and it'll be a while before we can get across that, more clay-based type of soil, kind of up near Lowell, Lake Michigan way. So for those that did chase the heavier, more productive acre, especially on the prairie soils, that leaves the sand acres for us to go chase, and we'll probably be back in middle of this week. For those that traditionally get started on their sands because it's driest, and that's where they habitually start, well, it may be a little bit longer yet. Kind of varies as you take a look at the precip map, but certainly we'll beat you all to the field based on what we got here over the weekend and what remains to be seen for the rest of the day, Monday. In terms of conversations had or expecting to have this over the weekend, lots of questions about, hey, should I get going on corn? I haven't yet. I have the opportunity to. Saturday, we were planting fields because we didn't get the rain on Friday like some of you all did. And so for those folks, I said that if you can, be patient and wait until Wednesday, get everything else ready to be able to roll middle of this week in anticipation of that upcoming heat that we have. And so for those that didn't, I had the caution flag out for the better part of a week now, saying, there is an opportunity to finally go on corn because we do not have the soil temperatures being dragged as far down as what we had. Not a green light, not a great spot to be, but if you need to get going on corn, go ahead and get after it. But this middle of this week is when I'm finally excited to tell folks, let's get to the field, let's get planning in earnest. If you've been patient, picking your spots, only running on beans as advised, now is, I guess by the time a lot of folks hear this, now will be when we get excited about dragging the corn planter back through the field. And I think that patience, Ben had spoke to it, a lot of it stems from a nice 2022 crop because folks, maybe they got started at the end of April, but a lot of us didn't get going until the middle of May before we dried back out. And we had a good corn crop coming out of that May 9, 10, 11 planting window that opened up, depending on where you are. So I think folks are mindful of that, and that's helping us in our roles. Maybe we have a little more buy-in from our growers as we suggest exercising that patience until we finally get that warm forecast that looks to be at our doorstep today.
Yeah, I think, and that's the, $64 million word, if you will, is patience. I've used it this morning in a number of conversations. And I think by any metric, whether you look at, a lot of times we reference the replant data that we've got, the chart that we've all seen, that if you've got the Purdue Pocket Guide, it's in there. You use it so much, it's the first page to fall out, and you figure out where you're going to put it, whether it's in the pocket or you're someplace in your truck. You look at that data, you look at a number of other metrics and personal experience from the last 5 to 8 years. We are just opening up the prime corn planting yield window. And so a little bit of patience. I recognize that we've got some stuff in the ground all over the state, some more than others, but a little bit of patience right now will go a long way whether it's ground conditions or waiting on a little bit of temperature, because we know moving into May here, we have got a prime window for big yield for corn if the rest of the summer cooperates with us. And so,
Absolutely.
the folks that I talk to over the next 5 days, just if you're listening, just to prime you, I guarantee you I'm going to say, let's just be patient a number of times in the conversation. Just because we can do a lot of damage trying to push it too early just to try to meet an arbitrary calendar date. If
Well,
the
and I think
conditions
that
are good, go.
Brian, I think that goes to, why we have all of these conversations and why the questions come in. So part of it's permission, part of it's, checking your thought process through as a grower. But what we understand about how a corn plant grows and develops, there just is not that agronomic, there's not that yield incentive to go ahead, put it in cold soil, sit there, wait for 2-3 weeks to come out of the ground. Now, there is the incentive from an operational efficiency standpoint. We can all appreciate, depending on the size of one's operation. If you need to get crawling across acres, then one needs to do that. But if you're asking for what spot should I be picking, we're finally getting the point on corn planting here in the state of Indiana, especially for the northern latitudes that Brian and I serve, that we're getting into that agronomic optimum time frame. And it's finally lining up with the environmental time frame too. Here, we've had kind of what a lot of folks would consider poor planting conditions from a temperature standpoint. We're not picking up the GDUs. So what's that incentive to get going? Very little. But now that we finally have the heat in the forecast, the crop will get established uniformly and will be off to a good start. So I guess maybe that's the reason why we speak about being patient here. It's what is the incentive to get going, and if there's not much of one there, then let's exercise the patience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
I mean, conversations last week, just from a practical standpoint, if you did, at least down here, if you planted on, Wednesday, Thursday ahead of the rain that came on Friday, we're going to dry out this week and get back into warmer soils and start planting, say Friday, so a full week or more later. If you look at the heat we've had, I mean that corn you planted last week is going to come out of the ground a day, maybe 2 days ahead of what gets planted on, and it's probably not going to be quite as vigorous as the stuff that comes up in 5 days. So I mean, I think it's something that practically we all know and we observe, but you're right, Carl, that 2022 planting season and result after the year just kind of stamped it on the forefront of everybody's brains. And I do feel like, and we've seen a little bit more patience this year, and I certainly appreciate that.
Most definitely, Ben. Just as an aside, running the GDU calculations, and just so everybody knows, I'm using the MRCC tool that we've got that's kindly hosted by Purdue University. And if planted in my geography, my place, last week, so the 19th, we've just accumulated 66 growing degree units so far, Ben. So roughly halfway, let's call it, not quite, a little bit over halfway to emergence. And so to your point, you plant something first of next week, not going to be a whole lot of difference based on the forecast in terms of emergence there, maybe a couple days probably. So
Well, when you're running those GDU calculations, Brian, and on days like today and tomorrow, and you would come up with a negative number, type of deal. There is no such thing as a backwards growing degree unit, but just by running the pure math of the
yep.
equation, we're not getting above 50, so we're not even reaching that threshold. That should tell you Mother Nature's trying to send the signal, hey fellas, this would probably be a bad time to get started.
Yep. What else, guys? We've kind of covered planning, and I know we're in that point. Not a lot of emerged crop at this point. Ben, you talked about the herbicide applications and considering that. Is there anything else that we need to get folks up to date on or give them some perspective on before we call it an episode this time?
I mean, it feels like beating a dead horse at this point, several weeks in a row, but you know, spring is going to show up eventually, and it feels like we're there. And I think that the opportunity that everybody's had to shake down planters or plant their patches or their wet holes, like Carl mentioned, that, if I look at what's left, it's 60, 80, 120 acre fields where we can really get going, and do a lot in a hurry. And those fields, I guess, we're this close. We're this close to being right. I would just reiterate, you know, as you get into those bigger fields, we all know there's some wetter areas, some lower lying areas. Let's really try to make sure that the field is fit, not just the good areas of the field that we're, call it 70% fit and we're going to go. Just continue to exercise that patience so we can see the good result of the patience that we've had to this point so far.
I think that's excellent advice. Again, we talk about that patience that's going to be really important for all of us. And like you said, Ben, we've got all that equipment. We can be a little bit patient because we can put such a large amount of the crop in such a short amount of time. So let's do it right and have a great cropping year. So Carl, anything else?
No, I think to Ben's point, the horse is dead, maybe resurrected and killed once again at this juncture. We've been a few weeks going here with that Easter theme of maybe being a little conservative with our broad strokes approach to this broadcast of what should a person do when it comes to the planting decision. For those that did go ahead and pick the spots where we did have some narrow planting windows, I don't think that you're going to be punished for that. I do think a majority of the stuff that has been in the ground has been sitting for, depending on when it got in there, a week, 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, might be 3 weeks by the time you listen to this. I don't believe that there's going to be that big of a disincentive from those decisions, but I do think there may be an incentive for those folks that were patient and maybe just got started on beans here lately and are looking to get the corn planter out of the shed once we get going the later part of this week. Now it'll be a lot of fun comparing notes across the border though in Illinois. Different ground, but a very different approach too. Many more corn planters rolling in that, on the eastern side of the state than soybean planters. And they do have more of the crop in than what we do in the state of Indiana. So it'll be fun to, as fairly as possible, given the different, ground, see how those two different schools of thought play out over the course of the year.
Yeah. Well, and that, that's our perspective as we sit here on the first day of May, recording for a May 3rd release. Things could certainly change. The weather, as to Ben's point, the 5-day forecast always seems to be warmer weather coming, and yet we're not seeing it. And so with that, I think we can call it an episode. I do want to take just a brief moment as we get a chance to visit with you, our listeners, and just remind everybody to be safe out there. Certainly when things open up here, we're going to go pretty hardcore to get things done as fast as we can. We recognize that there's a lot of dangers in the ag business, especially from the production ag standpoint. So we just ask that you be safe. Just maybe one extra step, maybe rather than jumping off of that second step of the tractor, maybe go all the way down to the bottom one. Maybe, I need to work on something. Let's put the blocks in to make sure the cylinders don't come down. All of the things that we think about, but we always feel like we're too busy. Safety is a core value for Corteva, an important part for the three of us as Pioneer employees to manage. And so just want to take a real brief minute and just ask everybody, we want you to be able to listen throughout the spring. Don't want you to get hurt. And we just ask you to take a little bit of time and be safe out there. So with that, we'll call it an episode. Carl, if somebody heard something that you said today and would really like to reach out to you or want to hear about whatever's going on the western side of the state of Indiana, how can they do that?
Yep. If you want to see what I have to say about should somebody plant today, tomorrow, next week, you can do so on Twitter at @CJoern or on Facebook at Joern Agronomy. How about you, Ben?
Yep, you can find me in the same places on Twitter at the Ben Jacob or on Facebook at Ben Jacob Agronomy. Mr. Shrader.
Yep, you can find me on Instagram, B_K_Shrader. So with that, we'll call it an episode. We thank you for joining us for the May 3rd edition of the Indiana Pioneer Agronomy Podcast.
Thank you for listening to this episode from the Pioneer Agronomy team. Be sure to visit pioneer.com/podcasts to access additional episodes and learn more about our extensive on-farm data and innovative digital tools that are fueling forward-thinking farming.